Good morning, everyone in Belém, Brazil, and good afternoon or evening to those in other continents like myself and Marco. So welcome to this session. Today I'm Jennifer Weidler and I'm part of the Impact Evaluation Unit that is part of the Office of Evaluation from World Food Program based in Rome. And today I'm going to present some of the findings coming from the evidence generated or in the fields of climate and resilience. Thank you very much for joining, and I'm happy to give the floor to Marco Del Rico, who will be the discussant today.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. My name is Marco Del Rico. I'm an economist with the GCF, and before joining the Green Climate Fund and the Independent Evaluation Unit, I was for around 15 years with the FAO. Thanks so much, Jennifer, for having me.
No, and thanks a lot for joining. So I'll start with the presentation, and then I give back the floor to Marco for the discussion. So just before I get straight into the findings, I wanted to give a brief overview of the work we do in the Impact Evaluation Unit in WFP. So we started our work around in 2018-19, and what we do is that we create portfolios of impact evaluations that align with every evidence needs, evidence priorities, but also World Food Program programmatic priorities. So for each stream of work, we conduct similar impact evaluations, so using the same measurement strategy, the same design, and estimating the impacts of same or very similar programs across countries. So we have a window on cash and gender, one of climate and resilience, the one I will talk about today, one on school feeding and school meals, and a work stream that cuts across the different windows, and the objective is to optimize humanitarian interventions. Okay, so now I go to the focus of this session. So in the past years, we've been generating evidence on the work that the climate and resilience team has been doing in WFP, and the research questions that we ask in these 4 evaluations is how does food assistance for assets, in many cases complemented by additional interventions, contribute to resilience? Food assistance for assets is one of the flagship programs in World Food Program. The idea is that households and population targeted participate or work on assets that aim to improve their resilience to shocks, and in exchange they receive cash or food. And then in many contexts, for instance, like in the Sahel, this food assistance for asset intervention is complemented by additional programs that also support resilience building. For instance, giving cash to people during lean season, school meals for children attending schools in those villages, and nutrition support. So we conducted 4 impact evaluations from 2020 to 2024 in Mali, Niger, South Sudan, and Rwanda. And in all these cases, we compare communities that have received this integrated package of support with communities that did not receive the package. This is following budget constraints. Just to mention that a big part of our work, so including the evaluations in Mali, Niger, and South Sudan, were funded by Germany, thanks to their generous support, and also the Rwanda one was supported by COICA. And also the work I'm presenting today has been conducted in collaboration with the World Bank. So in all these cases, we surveyed over 10,000 households in over 300 communities. We in the 4 countries, we collected baseline data before the intervention started and endline data 2 years after the intervention started. In the middle, we collected also high-frequency surveys. These are short surveys that collect information on key indicators such as food security, well-being, shocks, etc. And now in the next slides, I will explain why we collected this data. We measure a broad range of outcomes, including food security, but also agricultural outputs, livelihoods, mental health, etc. So this is just an example of the type of assets that households were working on. The idea, for instance, in this case in the Sahel, is that the assets contribute to land rehabilitation and restoration for agricultural or sometimes pastoral purposes through soil and water conservation activities. So for instance, on the right, you see the popular demi-lunes or half moons in Niger. So a key question when we talk about resilience is how we measure resilience, right? So in this work, and it's one of the main contributions of this work, is that we measure resilience in a dynamic way. So we build on the work from Barrett and Constance and Giselle Barrett, who conceptualize resilience as avoidance of poverty in the face of shocks and stressors. So what we do is that we measure welfare dynamics directly through these high frequency surveys. So by looking at, and collecting information from households every 2 months, what we can do is that we can see how well-being changes in the face of shocks and stressors, but also whether the program has different effects at different points in time. This is as opposed to most impact evaluations in the past that has measured outcomes at one point in time or before and after an intervention. So the way we operationalize this measure and we structure the findings that I will present today is that we say, okay, first we look at whether the program had impacts on food security. This is the main indicator in WFP and the main objective of programs to improve food security. And then we see, okay, when do these impacts occur? Are they homogeneous across the year, or do we see that the impacts are more pronounced at certain points? For instance, certain points of the agricultural season. And then if we see impacts on food security, we explore which mechanisms are driving these changes. So which other improvements in other outcomes are contributing to food security. So we want to know if the program is helping households better absorb shocks, or if they're also supporting households better adapt to their environment, for instance, by diversifying their livelihoods. And so this is, in addition to doing the analysis by country, we also pull the estimates. So on the last one, the light green, you see this is the estimate from the pool analysis. It's called inverse variance weighted average, because what we do is that we pull everything, and what we do is we give more weight to those coefficients that are more precisely estimated. So it's like we reward the more precise estimates. So what we are seeing is that we see improvements in food consumption score. Is one of the key indicators of World Food Program that measures both diversity of food consumed, but also quantity. Although we also look at other food security indicators, and we see that 2 years after the start of the intervention, food security improved, the food consumption score. Although we don't see significant impacts in all the countries, so when the lines of the confidence intervals touch the zero, it means that they're not statistically significant. Although, for instance, there are other indicators like the food insecurity experience scale, which measures food insecurity. We, for instance, see significant effects in South Sudan and Rwanda. But overall, we do see improvements. So if you look at the pool estimates, so we see that the program improves food security. Here is explaining or is shown in standard deviations, but we see that food consumption score improves between 1 and 3 points. And then we ask, okay, when do these impacts occur? So this is an example of Niger, where we can see impacts throughout the year and throughout the seasons. So the dots show the impact, and then the lines above and below are the confidence intervals. So when they don't touch the zero, so here in November 2021 and later in 2022, these are the times where it was significant. So this means that we are not observing impacts throughout the whole year. We see impacts mainly in the post-harvest season. So this, when we saw these results in the beginning, it was a surprise, because we were expecting larger effects during the lean season, which is when people are most food insecure, right? So the question is, okay, what is driving these changes? Why are people most food secure, or why are impacts stronger during post-harvest? And this helps explain this, because actually we see that the main driver of improvements in food security is improvements in agricultural production. We see strong impacts in Niger and South Sudan. Again, this is in standard deviations, but in absolute terms, is around 60 kilograms per household in the past season. So households participating in the program harvested on average 60 kilograms more of crops in the previous season. This explains why we see improvements in food security and also improvements during the post-harvest season. So after seeing this, we conclude that one of the main drivers of these improvements are improvements in harvest. But we also look at other outcomes, right? We want to know if the programs also supported other livelihood strategies, if they had impacts on other indicators. We don't see big changes in asset ownership or livestock ownership, except in South Sudan, where we do see improvements in asset ownership. However, in Rwanda, we do see increases in business ownership. So this is also a sign of livelihood diversification. In Rwanda, we didn't see impacts on agricultural production. This is because of the nature of the program, where many households didn't have access to land. So this also could explain why we see different impacts in Rwanda. And then we also see some increase in wage labor. So in some cases, households were more likely to work outside of the household following the program. So another interesting point to explore, and this is almost my last slide, is whether the program is benefiting some households more than others. And we are observing interesting patterns. For instance, we see that in South Sudan, actually male-headed households benefited more than female-headed households. The reason is that female households were less likely to own land. So because they could not benefit from this increase in agricultural production, also the increases in food security were not as pronounced as male-headed households. So this is also interesting to keep in mind. And also in Niger, another interesting finding is that for people who live closest to the assets implementation sites, effects double. So the program was more effective if people were closer to the assets. And also, so to wrap up, we see that food assistance for assets and overall integrated packages improve food security in some cases even after the program ended. One of the main mechanisms is through increases in agricultural production. At the same time, we do see differences between countries. So, for instance, as I was mentioning, we see that in South Sudan, for instance, houses were more likely to own assets, while in Rwanda we see improvements in business ownership. And also, I didn't mention this, but we also see improvements in psychological well-being in Niger and Rwanda, and in social capital in Niger. Yet there is still scope to strengthen these programs to achieve even stronger impacts on resilience. So we see that households do not show much changes in off-farm livelihood diversification. So this is important when we think about adaptation and climate change. And at the same time, also households continue to experience lower levels of food security during the lean season. So also there's scope to strengthen this program so that people also can improve their food security during the lean season. Okay, so I'll stop here. It was a very broad overview, but hope it was clear. And I give now the floor to Marco for the discussion while I'll start reading the questions in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks. Very, very, very nice presentation and very interesting content. I really appreciate your presentation. And I think that the work that you guys are doing in WFP is super important. And I'm especially excited by the impact evaluation windows that seek evidence, specific evidence on specific areas or topic of knowledge. No? In particular, I think we should consider joining efforts to gather greater evidence on areas where we know the largest part of our budgets is normally focused, and where we also know that there is gaps in evidence. This also makes me think about the efforts currently undergoing under the SDG Coalition, the Sustainable Development Goals Coalition initiatives, where we, for example, as GCF, we are co-leading the Planet Pillar, identifying and addressing knowledge gaps on what works and what doesn't. So there are multiple challenges into this research toward knowledge. We are producing, in fact, more knowledge than ever. If you think about what where we were some 10, 15 years ago with respect to where we are now in terms of generating impact evaluation. And also, if you think about how many impact evaluation units are today present in UN, MDBs, or climate finance institutions, there is really a lot. But the real challenge to me is the uptake. No? There is still a large knowledge gap, exactly where the largest part of the climate finance is directed. So the real question is how to make sure that the evidence we generate can then actually be adopted for policy making. So in your presentation, there are many aspects that are to me super interesting. Let me pick 3 of them, not because there is no more, there are more than this, but just for the sake of time. There is so much that we can still do. You correctly mentioned that the programs can increase food security by helping absorbing shocks. There is a paper that John Ulimwengu from IFPRI and I co-authored. This try to demonstrate how shocks are not independent nor identically distributed among the different households. And acknowledging this means a lot in terms of policies, since this tell us that not every household will react in the same way to the same shock, which perhaps can repeatedly hit the same household. So identifying the real effect, and I see you guys are working on this. That's absolutely brilliant. Identify the real effect of those shocks is super important. Another key aspect that you correctly mentioned in your presentation is the time dimension in the definition of the resilience. Especially, I'm glad you mentioned the definition of the resilience measurement technical working group. This takes me to consider about the uptake of the new technologies adopted. We in GCF, we have evidence, for example, that the uptake of those new modern technologies can have some discontinuities. We noticed in Madagascar, for example, that after initial very strong uptake, beneficiaries started discontinuing the adoption of modern climate smart agriculture because they proved on the long term to be less remunerative than the traditional knowledge mechanism. Something similar we found also in Guatemala, where we are noting that Maya population are a bit struggling in adopting the climate smart agriculture techniques with respect to the milpa traditional system of cultivation. You also mentioned another key aspect to me of the resilience enhancing initiatives, which is the heterogeneity of the effect on resilience and food security. It's a super important topic to me, since there is no one size fits all policy, and there is a huge amount of evidence showing how context-specific interventions are definitely more efficient than, traditional top-down exercises. One additional comment I have is on the 3 different windows that you guys identified: cash transfer and gender, resilience and climate, school meals. I think it will be at some point also interesting to see how those 3 aspects can combine together. And I think the idea of resilience and climate resilience can be absolutely interesting to add a lens on this. One note that I want to make is on the use of an aggregated measure of resilience. Basically, we are starting from the same background. So you mentioned the technical working group, and adopting an aggregated measure of resilience is something that we all discussed ever since the beginning, in January 2012, when we launched this technical working group. So that's absolutely important, but at the same time, it must be relatively simple to make sure that this can be adapted and adopted to the context that we need to use it. Let me conclude by mentioning 3 aspects that we are currently working at the GCF. Within the LORTA team, that is the Learning-Oriented Real-Time Impact Assessment Unit within the Independent Evaluation Unit, we onboard every year somewhere between 4 and 6 new projects to generate evidence on the impact of the GCF resources on adaptation and mitigation interventions. As you know, GCF is a second-level due diligence entities, and basically what we do is we implement projects through accredited entities like WFP, for example. Some of them, like you are doing, gather a lot of evidence, and we are super convinced that we can combine our efforts to achieve greater evidence and to produce and to fill the gaps, the knowledge gaps which are there. Another thing that I wanted to mention is on the relevance of resilience threshold. We are developing, and on this we are working together with Mark Constance from Cornell, an approach to measure resilience thresholds. Now, since we think there is a quite consistent understanding and agreement on food security thresholds. We are identifying resilience threshold by identifying the level of resilience necessary to reach a food security level. So that's a little kind of reverse engineering the issue of measuring the resilience the resilience thresholds. But I think it's super worth exploring this direction. And last but not least, there is an ongoing effort on climate resilience. In this moment, I think there is a huge interest on this topic, which can become the new topic, the new frontier topic of resilience in the forthcoming years. We are gathering a group of people, a group of institutions, and I think of Cornell, IFPRI, Oxford University, Exeter universities, to identify a kind of a new, if you wish, technical working group on climate resilience to achieve the same type of agreement on definition and measurement. So those are initiatives that are ongoing. And again, I think that the initiative that you and Jonas are leading is really fitting on this, and it's absolutely crucial and timely for what we are doing. So congratulations again for your initiative and for the very good presentation.
No, thanks a lot, Marco, and I agree. There's still work to do on the measurements, so of course, happy to continue to work together. So I'm looking at the questions in the chat. I think the first one, it's I don't know if it's for you, Marco. It's on Guatemala. Did you work on Guatemala? It says, what were the reasons behind less uptake of climate-smart agriculture among farmers in Guatemala? In another case, you mentioned it was on account of plotting of remunerations from climate-smart versus traditional practices. So for sure, it's not for me. Okay. No, thanks for the question. And at the moment, I only see that one.
If you want, I can respond. I mean, the point is that we are working in a specific area, which are the highlands of Guatemala, and there the population is the traditional Maya population. Basically, what we are noting is that the milpa adoption, the adoption of milpa is very much rooted with the heritage of those population, of course, and this is much more oriented toward purely agricultural income generating activities, if you will, while otherwise the new modern climate smart agriculture interventions tend to diversify the intervention, so perhaps they are more oriented toward a non necessarily strictly agriculture interventions. So this seems to be the current switch between adopting a purely agricultural and a more modernized approach.
Okay, I don't see any other question. Anything, any clarification or anything you would like us to expand? Happy to. We have around 5 minutes left. Okay. Okay. We can also close. Yes, no, go ahead.
Perhaps, Jenny, if you don't mind, just to respond to the second question of our colleague Arunjana. I'm sorry for the pronunciation of your name. I'm sure I'm pronouncing this not properly, but I apologize. Where you ask about the possibility of exploring the research with Cornell. Of course, we are super open. I mean, that's something. Oh, thanks so much. We are super happy to open the doors. We are finalizing the paper, but again, feel free to reach out, and I'll put in touch with the two authors, me and Mark, so the two Marcos. So it's definitely open. It's an open project, as well as for the climate resilience approach. So feel free to reach out.
Okay. No, if I can add, and also, I mean, if there are no more questions, then we can close. I just to say that all this work that I just presented, it's all of the impact evaluation reports are published in our website, and then the paper that combines all the analysis, it's coming up hopefully soon. And now we started expanding our work also to look more on specifically agricultural support and timing of transfer, for instance, in Ghana. And also we are doing work on anticipatory action that my colleague Jonas is presenting in about 1 hour. And then, some of the things we've been thinking in terms moving forward, but also to work with Marco and other organizations is, for instance, looking better at the layering and sequencing of activities. So at the moment we look at, the whole integrated package against no intervention, but it would be interesting to understand better, how cost effective at each activities. When organizations combine multiple activities, it's still something to explore that would be that we want to explore, moving forward. Yes. And also, in terms of uptake, just to say that I do agree. Marco started with that. It's extremely important. Just if the evidence is not new, it's not used, then again, it's not relevant. But then for our organizations, but then so what we are doing is we are also starting to record, how each, in our cases, country offices are starting to use evidence. Just to say, we have already examples of country offices that have used the evidence to inform the future programs or future phases of programs. And I think this is something very, very interesting to always discuss and mention. So that is something we are doing because, of course, we do want the evidence to be used. So I think with that we can close, and thank you all for taking the time to join.
Thank you again, Jennifer.